Good afternoon, and welcome to this special presentation on the COVID vaccine. My name is Skip Foster, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. And I want to let you know about the amazing institutions that have put this program together. First of all is Tallahassee Memorial Healthcare, which of course has done a fantastic job during this crisis and has kept our community healthy and informed on everything that has been happening with this pandemic. Also, the Village Square, which is all about finding ways to get information to folks and promote civil discourse and civic engagement. And we appreciate what the Village Square does. And finally, USA Today's Florida Network, newspapers from Pensacola to Palm Beach, and of course the hometown paper here, the Tallahassee Democrat. We appreciate all of those sponsors helping to make this possible. The only people we want to thank, even at a higher level than those sponsors, are our experts that have joined us from across the country today. First, I want to introduce Dr. Geeta Swamy, who is the Associate Vice President for Research at Duke University in Durham, among other things. She's got a long list of responsibilities there. Welcome, Dr. Swamy. Thank you for being here. Also, Dr. Paul Spearman, who is the Director of the Division of Infectious Diseases at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. And what these two folks have in common, welcome to you, Dr. Spearman, is that they are both members of the FDA's vaccine and related biologic products advisory committee. I almost got chosen to be on that committee. I don't know what happened that it didn't come through, but I think they found more qualified people than you two. So thank you for that service and for the amazing work that you're doing and for being here with us today. It's maybe the one good thing about Zoom Nation that we're able to connect with people from near and far. So I've got a list of questions for these experts, some of which are mine, many of which have already been submitted from viewers or potential viewers, but it's not too late to get one submitted. I'll be monitoring chat through some folks that are helping me out, and so please send any questions through Zoom, the Zoom Q&A function, or on Facebook chat, and we'll get to those. So Dr. Swamy, let's just start. We're going to, in golf, the architects are supposed to put the easiest hole as the first one, so I'm going to start off nice and easy and just ask you, what does a vaccine do? In layman's terms, how do they work?
Yeah, and thanks, Skip, for also having me, and glad to be here with Paul, because we do go back a little ways in the research space and in working in the FDA Advisory Committee. And as you can probably tell, vaccines are probably near and dear to both of our hearts in what we do. So the way that vaccines work essentially is they are a way to stimulate or activate your own body's immune system. If you get exposed to an infection, whatever it is, whether it's the flu, whether it's whooping cough, whether it's shingles virus, like chickenpox virus, so forth, your body naturally combats that infection and makes something called antibodies. Antibodies work against whatever that infection is, whether it's a bacteria or a virus. So all a vaccine does is essentially mimic that process or stimulate that, get that process started. And different vaccines work in different ways, but they usually do something that have something in it that resembles a piece or a part or a component of that infectious product to start with, either the bacteria or the virus or some downstream effect of that. So it stimulates your immune system to make those antibodies. When it stimulates your immune system, just like if you were exposed to that in the first place, your immune response is to have things like fever, to be achy all over, to feel kind of joint pain and a little tired. So those are the normal things that you would see after vaccines as well. And you probably have seen people posting things after getting the COVID vaccine. They're like, yay, I got a fever. Like, oh, I'm excited that I got a headache or my body hurts. And they're actually saying, from a physician standpoint, we're like, yay, the vaccine is working. So that's really all that vaccines are. They're really a way to stimulate the body's immune system rather than getting the infection and having worse symptoms.
Great. And Dr. Spearman, this is a 1-2 punch, literally and figuratively. This this vaccine. Why is that? Why does there need to be two as opposed to just the flu shot, which is one?
Yeah, that's a good question, Skip. And let me just say, I'm happy to be here too. It's good to be with this group. You know, some vaccines can be given as a single dose, and we know that they work that way. And others require what we call a prime and then a boost. And there are different definitions for those. But in this case, both of the vaccines that have been authorized under this emergency use authorization are mRNA vaccines. And so they were studied in, how well did a single dose work in animal models, and how well did 2 doses work in animal models. And basically what was found was that after the second dose, there was a profound increase in the protective antibodies. And so it's just seemed to be, a very logical way to do it in humans. And so most of the work that's been done, and all of the work to my knowledge in the human trials, was with the prime and boost dosing. So it gives your body a chance to first see something, kind of prepare for that next response. And then when it sees the same thing again, it basically is able to expand those immune cells. And so that you get both cell-mediated immune responses and the type of cells that produce antibodies get to expand and give you better, and we hope longer lasting protection from the prime boost. I think that's what's meant by the two shot approach here, but you could also think of it as 2 arms of the immune system, but I think you're talking about the prime boost.
So I'm going to immediately go to a viewer question that has come in recently, and that is folks that are concerned because of the struggles that there have been with administering the first vaccine, that the second vaccine might not be available when it's supposed to be, or that somehow that will get missed. What would that mean? How tight does the timing have to be? And what if someone just isn't able to get the second one for whatever reason? How big of a problem is that? Is one worse than none? Do you understand the question, Dr. Swamy?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, one is better than none, is what I would say, first of all.
Okay.
So, part of the issue, of course, is that, what we like to be able to do is tell you things we know based on facts, based on data. So what happens outside of a pandemic is you actually do studies to look at all of these sorts of things, to look at whether, first you look at what you think is your best case scenario 2. Then you say, well, let's look at people who got only one. Let's see if we could do only one and get away with that. Let's even change the dose, like give a half dose, give different ranges, things like that. But what we do know from the data that was provided by both Moderna and Pfizer is that there was a dramatic reduction in disease, even within the first few weeks after the first dose. So between the first dose and the second dose. So we definitely want people to come and get their first dose. We want them to get their second, because as Paul mentioned, we want there to be, a much more robust and significant effect to protect our communities, rather than something that might be short-lived and not as sustained. There probably isn't any harm in extending out the time frame between the 2 doses, meaning if someone can't get there on a day that they're scheduled for their dose, or something happens to the supply. I don't think we want it to be many months, but a few days to a few weeks probably won't make much of a difference. I don't know if Paul have a different opinion on that.
I agree with you, Geeta. I think, it's a first goal is to get the first vaccine, because we know that does offer some protection. Getting the boost is also going to be important, but you will have substantial protection from the first shot. But I think we should put that in the context that all of the studies were done with both of those immunizations. So there's a bit of uncertainty. If you say, well, I just need one, you're kind of, we know that there's some protection from one, but 2 is better. And so we haven't studied in detail what would happen with just one. And it may be that the immunity would decrease, relatively quickly beyond a month or 2 months or 3 months. We just don't know for sure.
So the 21 days is perfect world, but certainly a matter of a couple days isn't going to make any difference. And it sounds like y'all are saying maybe even multiple days would still be fine with the second shot. And we want perfect state. but would be better to get it even a week or a little bit more late than not get it at all, right? Is that a fair?
That's right. I think that should be the plan, right, to space out, but we wouldn't turn anyone away who showed up, say, 4.5 weeks or 5 weeks after the first dose. We would still give them that second dose.
Okay. And we're nimble here, so I'm sticking with another viewer question on point. Can you, if you get Pfizer first shot, do you have to get Pfizer second shot, or can those be mixed if there was a supply problem?
I'll take that one if that's all right, Geeta. So I think, first of all, when you want the right advice on these kinds of questions and you're not in the midst of a forum, CDC has answers to many, many of these things on their FAQs on their website. So a lot of these are there. So it's great, a great resource for the future. And the answer to this is you don't want to mix the two. Scientifically, I could say as a scientist, I think it would be okay. It's not likely that you'll get any adverse reactions based on one RNA vaccine versus another, but it has not been formally studied in human trials. So the recommendation is, if you get the Moderna vaccine first, get the Moderna vaccine for the second, for the booster. And if you get the Pfizer vaccine first, get the Pfizer booster. So that is the recommendation. We do like the idea of that maybe someday we could mix and match these, and we will be studying those kind of things in upcoming human trials. But right now we don't know.
Great. Here's another question that's similar to one that I had. I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. What conditions could someone have that would cause them to not be vaccinated? So what sort of conditions, and I think somebody here is asking about allergies. Are there any allergies that would exclude someone from the population of folks that need to be vaccinated?
Paul, you want to take that one?
Sure, I can take that one. So this is a very good question. If you have already, some of the answers to this, there are basically just a few categories of those that are completely excluded. One is if you've already had a terrible reaction to a COVID mRNA vaccine, you wouldn't want to get another one. Okay, so that's one that would be excluded. If you know that you have a severe allergic reaction to any of the components of the vaccine, and there's something called polyethylene glycol, or PEG, in these formulations. And so if you know you had a bad reaction to that ingredient, then you'd have to stay away. If you had like severe raised rash or anaphylaxis or those kinds of bad reactions. And then there's sort of a more intermediate category where if you have had a really bad reaction to other things that you've received, like you just have a really bad allergy to some medication or something like that, then it's not an exclusion for getting the vaccine, but you might want to consult with you certainly want to consult with your primary care doc, and you might want to consult with an allergist about the safety of the vaccines in your particular situation.
Okay, but if I get the sniffles when pollen comes out, or if I have a bad reaction to shrimp, I mean, that's not what you're talking about, right?
That's not what we're talking about.
Okay.
We're talking about the vast majority of people that have, allergies to various things can get this vaccine safely, and that was found out in the trials.
Okay. Dr. Swamy, you talked a little bit about we're getting a couple questions in this thread about when I get the vaccine, what should I expect? And you talked about, a low-grade fever. So what is kind of the range there? And is it okay to have no symptoms at all? Is that a signal that maybe it's not working like it should? And then on the other end of the spectrum, how bad can I feel before it's not okay?
No, it's a great question. I think so first of all, I'll say that we expect we expect to see side effects or symptoms of side effects from vaccines. Having said that, though, many participants, between the two trials, between the Moderna and the Pfizer trial, I think we're upwards of close to about 40,000, just under 40,000 people who actually got the vaccine. And as you've seen now If you look at the CDC vaccine tracker, we're getting close to 10 million people across the US who have gotten the vaccine. So what we know, though, is many people have no side effects, and that's actually okay. I think the other part, too, is it's how you perceive side effects, right? If you're looking for them, you might have them. I don't know about you all, but given how busy we've all been, it's not uncommon for me to have a headache many afternoons. It might just be another Diet Coke and some coffee or something like that. But it's more about sustained symptoms if people are having problems from that. What we know, again, from the trials is that when patients do have symptoms, they still are pretty much mostly what we call mild, which means that you have a symptoms, but it doesn't really interfere with your ADLs, what we call activities of daily living. It doesn't prevent you from, doing your work. It doesn't prevent you from doing anything in your household, things like that. And even then, when we see people having symptoms, the most common is for them to occur within the first 48 hours after the vaccine. Sometimes that might be sustained out for another day. But if you're having them, at least on our instructions, what we're using here at Duke University for our vaccination sort of instructions are saying if any of those symptoms persist after 48 hours to contact, right now we're mostly in our healthcare worker vaccinations. So it says then to contact your employee health space. So in the patient care setting, which we've started that too, it basically says to contact here at the vaccine clinic or to contact your primary care provider type thing. But the most common symptoms are going to be headache, fatigue, feverishness. Most people don't actually register fever, but they feel kind of that hot, sweaty, clammy kind of feeling. Some body aches, maybe, sort of joint pains. Definitely most common, though, with vaccine is going to be something at the site where you got your injection, whether it's some mild pain or soreness to swelling, even redness at the site. And those symptoms also usually go away within a couple of days.
So 48 hours is the kind of the threshold. If we get beyond 48 and we're feeling anything other than the most kind of minor stuff, it's time to do a little check-in. Is that fair?
Exactly.
What about other medications? Are there other medications that impact the effectiveness of the vaccine or that just simply aren't compatible with it?
Well, I don't think I know of anything, Paul, that's a contraindicated medication, but we certainly don't have enough data quite yet in individuals that say are on medications to suppress their immune system. That's a group of patients where I think there's nothing, again, that would be harmful, would be contraindicated. We just don't know yet. I don't think we have enough information to say whether it will work as well. I don't know if you want to say anything to that, Paul. But
sure. We've had those questions quite a bit. I think those are good questions. That you're right. There's not some particular medication where it's forbidden that you get the vaccine. I think in the case of a patient who is receiving very significant immunosuppression, it's something that the doctors treating them have to kind of consider. If they think that they're at a stage, for instance, after a bone marrow transplant or something like that, where their body's not yet able to make antibodies, then they may want to delay, the getting the COVID vaccines until a certain time. But I think that's kind of an individual decision, because you also want to weigh the risk in these individuals, who might get sick with COVID. So the other thing that is somewhat contraindicated is if you have received one of the monoclonal antibodies. People have heard about the monoclonal antibodies that are used in the outpatient setting for someone who's COVID positive to try to prevent them from getting sick, because they're in some high risk group. If you've received one of those, then you really should probably wait. And the recommendation from CDC is to wait 90 days after that, because you already have the antibodies, and it's thought that that might dampen down the response to the vaccine. It's not certain that it would, but that's the recommendation.
What about pregnant women, Dr. Swamy? Where do they fit into this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been talking a lot about that lately. And I think that, again, I just want to come back to the fact that what we really, really would love to be able to talk to everyone about and provide everyone is hard, sound data to say what we know. When we don't have that, it's based on our awareness of science, our awareness of what we do know about how vaccines work, and what we know physiologically about any condition such as pregnancy. So what we know about the two coronavirus vaccines, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, the way that that mRNA works, right, is that it goes into your body cells to create the protein, the spike protein that you find on the coronavirus, then your body makes antibodies to those. So from a biologic standpoint, there is no reason to believe that that vaccine would cause any harmful effects for a pregnant woman herself or for her developing fetus. Can I say that with a certainty? I can't, because I don't have data to say that, to give you, that evidence. What we do know, though, is that pregnant women are at higher risk for severe COVID disease. They have a higher risk of hospitalization, a higher risk of admission to the ICU, to require mechanical ventilation, and even a higher risk of mortality. So what we have advocated for, what the FDA allowed, what the CDC has authorized or has recommended, and what other societies such as the American College of OBGYN has said, is that it really comes down to a patient level decision, an individual patient to determine, weigh the risks and benefits. We know the vaccine is incredibly efficacious, right at 95%. And we know what the risks are of COVID in pregnancy. I think where the question becomes that you have to weigh is, what is your chance of getting COVID, right? So if you're fortunate enough, even though we're all getting very tired of it, if you're fortunate enough to be able to stay home, work from home, minimize your exposures, then your chance of getting COVID may be very low. However, if you're a frontline worker, if you're a teacher, if you're a daycare provider, if you're in a setting where you don't have as much comfort in your ability to prevent infection, then I'd say your chance of getting infection is high. So it's really about weighing those risks that we know from getting the disease versus not, and thinking about it, making a decision. I will say that we were, I think, more strongly advocating that women who are breastfeeding, there really is no concern from getting the vaccine, that would be somehow transmitted through breast milk and provide any concern or harm to a baby.
It looks like you and I are working from home. Dr. Spearman, on the other hand, is sitting on a piece of scaffolding overlooking a beautiful hospital there. Oh no, maybe that's one of those backgrounds.
No, that is a background, but that is a research building that I'm actually sitting in right now.
Okay. Well, that's beyond that. You talk about tough to understand, tough to comprehend. So we got some, I think, well, first I want to ask you about children, Dr. Spearman. I think it's widely known that the threat to children from COVID is much lower than from older people, certainly not zero. At what point is the threat of a disease outweighed by the potential side effects of the vaccine, and what is going on with the vaccine as it pertains to young people?
Sure, that's a question I'm very fond of, actually. We're early on, as the vaccines were being very rapidly developed through Operation Warp Speed and lots of collaborating scientists and academic centers and government, it was obviously most important to focus on adults and especially elderly and those with underlying conditions, just to be able to get the vaccine, get enough safety data and get some effectiveness data so that we could really get it into the adult population because of the high risk there. But even during that development, there's been a push to try to look in kids, or when will we be able to evaluate the safety and the effectiveness in kids? And I personally think that's very important. And I've been involved with a group that has put together some recommendations and a protocol template for some of the vaccine manufacturers to try to help them see how we would recommend moving into kids from what we know already in adults. Where that stands right now is that we know that Pfizer's authorization goes down to age 16. So that, first of all, anyone 16 and up can get that vaccine. And now they are evaluating down to age 12 right now. And they will be, hopefully will be letting us know how that's going in coming months. And so we're working our way down in ages. And that's sort of how we recommend the other manufacturers look at this. Not necessarily exactly the way Pfizer's doing it, but pick an age group of adolescents and go down in age so we can see the safety and the efficacy in that group, and then go into older children and then go into younger children. And the reason for that is I think we can establish safety. There might have to be some different doses tested depending on the individual vaccines, because as you get especially to infants and very young children, you can imagine sometimes the dosing is different. The body size is different, the metabolism is different. So we need to learn some things about these vaccines in kids. There are good reasons to want to go into children though, that, it's not, COVID is not harmless in children. There have been hundreds of deaths. And so that's not insignificant. And many, many hospitalizations. In fact, hospitalization rates in children are now going up in many parts of the country. So this is a concern. So having a vaccine that can be safely given to children to prevent this is really important. And also you may have some indirect benefit once we start being able to prevent disease in children. That might help, not only would help the children get back into the normal swing of things and get back into schools, for instance, but it might help with spread. We don't know with certainty how well the vaccines prevent spread in those that don't have disease. We know the vaccines prevent disease. They work wonderfully to prevent severe disease and wonderfully to prevent disease at all in COVID. But will they prevent asymptomatic persons from spreading the virus? That answer is not 100% known. It's likely that that spread from asymptomatic individuals will be diminished, but we just don't know how much. And so, but going back to kids, it's possible that a vaccine will really help the spread that occurs from kids to adults, for instance. So it's a way of also dealing with the pandemic. So lots of reasons that we want to know how well the vaccines work, and certainly to establish their safety in children.
Dr. Swamy, if I tested positive a week ago and now test negative, but I've got an antibody test that shows that I had it, why do I need this vaccine? Or if I don't need it today, how long do I wait until I get it?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a lot of uncertainty, I'd say, out there about what to do if you've had COVID, if you have it now, if you have an antibody test and so forth. A couple of things, what we do know is that having COVID infection by itself is not protective against getting COVID infection again. It's not incredibly common that people are getting it multiple times, but it's not zero. And some of the individuals in the studies, in the 2 trials that we mentioned, actually did get repeat infection over the course of the study duration. So having had it once doesn't protect you for a long period of time. And it's some of the information that helps to support what Dr. Spearman was saying earlier about making sure people get 2 doses so that you can get that prolonged immunity if we can. So as far as timing though, right now, what we are recommending, and again, based on CDC guidance, is that individuals should wait until they are no longer symptomatic from COVID. And that they have met criteria that they would be able to no longer have to quarantine, whatever those criteria are at the time. And I say that because they have been continuing, they continue to change over time. So the idea there being that if you don't have any symptoms and you've met all those criteria, you're not going to be infectious to other people coming out, especially since we know that most vaccinations are happening in large scale centers or spaces or clinic kind of settings. The other issue is that there could also be something to the side effect profile. If you have recently had infection and then we stimulate your antibodies to produce again, and increasing that side effect profile. Again, unlikely that it would be harmful, like directly cause a problem, as much as we don't want people to, who just recovered to then experience, unfortunate symptoms again. So as long as people meet those criteria, they should get a vaccine. And again, I think the message there is to make sure people understand that COVID infection by itself is not a lifelong prevention. Sort of our standard teaching for most of us probably on this call, at least depending on your age, that, you know, once you had chicken pox, you don't really have to worry about it again. But even that is not exactly 100% true, but mostly the case. But with COVID, it's clear that you can get reinfected. But the trials did show that in individuals who had antibodies at entry into the study, that the vaccine actually helped to prevent infection in those people as well. So we know that it's effective still in them.
And then quick follow-up to that, because you mentioned chickenpox. There's been a couple questions about shingles shot, flu shot, pneumonia shot. Is there anything in the COVID vaccine that causes those to not be necessary or to not work well together or that kind of thing?
Yeah, you know, as we said before, what right now in general, there is usually a recommendation that you can co-administer vaccines or give vaccines at the same time, as long as they're not what we call live vaccines. But because we don't have, you know, enough information to date on COVID vaccine as, you know, performing in the masses, and because we want to make sure that nothing interferes with the COVID vaccine response between, say, that first and second. Right now, the recommendation is to have at least about 2 weeks between any vaccinations. So I would say that given everything that's going on in the world right now, the COVID-19 vaccine is the one that should be prioritized when it's your time, your age group, your medical categorization, and so forth. And the others, while they're important to prevent, really could be put off for about, you know, a few weeks or a month or so. If you
Okay, so yeah, plus your arm can only take so much, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, except Paul and his colleagues would give little kids lots of doses of vaccines, you know, in the 5. But
No, we're not that mean. It's just, you know, they need to be protected. So.
That's right. They're more resilient than us adults anyway, to be honest.
That's right. So, Dr. Spearman, there's some questions through here that are skeptical and concerned about the speed with which these vaccines were developed, and concerns about side effects. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay for people to question things. What would you say to folks who say, golly, man, we've been trying to figure out the common cold for 1,000,000 years and other things, and all of a sudden they were able to whip out a vaccine for this thing we'd never heard of in a day and a half. I'm not sure I trust it, given how fast it was developed. What would you say to those folks?
Well, first I would say that's very understandable. You know, given all of the events of the last year and many of the things coming out that just made you doubt everything, I can understand that. But I think for those of us who've seen exactly how these vaccines were developed and who know the people that were in the initial stages of developing them, you know, it is an amazing story as to why they could come out so fast. And so you know, that's sort of one side of the story. It is amazingly good thing that the development, especially for the mRNA vaccines, could come about so fast. And there's lots of reasons for that. There's a mRNA platform that was already ready to go. There was our friend Barney Graham at Vaccine Research Center at NIH, who had already developed a MERS vaccine and was just, you know, already on it as soon as the sequence was out for the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And so lots of serendipity there, but also, you know, careful, good science coming together around the technology. And so that's sort of one side of the story. But then, you know, people worry about, well, did then the trials go so quickly that we compromised on safety? And I've been involved in, at my own site here, Cincinnati Children's, doing the Pfizer vaccine, and we're still doing the AstraZeneca vaccine. Across the street, they were doing the Moderna vaccine at University of Cincinnati. So we've had a chance to do multiple vaccines. I can tell you that the trials themselves were not compromised. They are to very, very high standards, as high as all of our vaccine trials. And, you know, vaccines are really held to a very high standard because they're meant to go predominantly into individuals who were not ill, you know, at the time they're getting them. So we examine their safety profile intensively. I can tell you that even though they were done rapidly, the safety, the way things went with these trials was not compromised. People did stay up late, and there was a lot of confusion at times because you had to start new websites, and you had to work with new commercial outfits helping run the trials, and you had to adapt very quickly. But the standards were high, the data reporting is high. I've seen personally the conduct of the trials, and I think they're very, very trustworthy. And Geeta and I both have a chance to sit on the verb packet with FDA, as you mentioned, although I've been excluded because and Geeta has too, in terms of the actual authorization of the 2 mRNA vaccines, because we're both involved in ongoing trials. That we didn't want there to look like there's a conflict of interest on that committee. But I can say that from watching the proceedings and being on that committee in lots of other times, that the review process was also very complete and thorough. I read through the EUAs for Moderna and Pfizer and listened in on most of those presentations, and it was done carefully. So all I can say is what I know. And I think, but though, if you look, all of this is transparent and out there on the FDA website if you want to look at all the materials that were submitted by the companies. So it is a remarkable process that I think they've done, from a regulatory standpoint, have done a very good job.
So when I get amoxicillin or, stuff that I pick up for whatever from the pharmacy, and you open up the little thing, there's risks for every drug you take, right? Okay, so some people report these symptoms, and there's even the risk of fatality with certain drugs. How do you quantify the risk here? And I know in the news recently has been the Miami doctor, and I know I think it's the CDC that's going to investigate what happened there. What is the risk, and how do you, when you're developing pharmaceuticals, how do you balance risk and benefit, and what is acceptable risk? Is that too convoluted a question?
No, I mean, there is risk is a tricky thing. It's sort of a lot of things about understanding probabilities. And to be honest, as humans, our brains don't really grasp it quite well. Otherwise, we wouldn't lose so much in Vegas when we went, because we would be able to, manage those kind of numbers a lot better. I only say that because I don't know that if we quote to you, well, this percentage of people, have this outcome, it's hard to make you feel better, right? Like everyone will say, like, well, for my threshold might be, well, if it was less than 1%, that's very rare. Somebody else might say, well, but that's too many. What we know as far as side effects that we saw were incredibly safe in both vaccines. There were a few deaths that were reported in both studies, and that all of that, as Paul said, is all publicly available information out there in the FDA submissions for both trials. All of those deaths that happened in both of the studies were from particularly older individuals that had other underlying conditions that were related to having a heart attack or a stroke. I think that is one other thing to note, is that in a standard study of a new drug or a vaccine that we would take on, actually a lot of the people enrolled in these trials now would not have usually been enrolled. Often we do studies in what we call particularly healthy volunteers, healthy participants. But we know that individuals at risk for severe disease with COVID are older individuals, 65 and up, and then also individuals with other underlying medical conditions. So I think the good part to that is a lot of the people who are at risk were included in the trials and did not have worsening of their disease or other severe outcomes. So I think from the standpoint of comparing it, looking at that sort of package insert, that kind of information, I think one differing aspect to that, Skip, is that we haven't had the luxury of time. And as Paul said, that's probably the only thing that has been particularly different in the path to the trials and the approval process, is the time that has been sort of restricted to. But I would tell you that the reason that we were able to do what we did in such a short period of time is because everyone from our study coordinators enrolling people in participants, to study participants themselves, to the industry sponsors, to the FDA, to the CDC. There were people working many, many, many hours around the clock and put aside much of their other work to do this. So it just tells you that it can be done. We're all going to figure out, years from now, what the expense of COVID has been to us. And I don't mean that just financially, just other things. But it definitely is the case that I feel very confident that everything that happened can be reviewed, can be audited, can be seen, is transparent. And I think that's ultimately the best way to know about the integrity of what's happening.
So the last kind of skeptics question, Dr. Spearman, there's been this kind of weird thing where healthcare workers appear to be more hesitant to take the vaccine. You would think these would be the most informed, most confident folks. What's going on with that? Why has that happened?
That's also a good question, Skip. Appreciate it. I think, first of all, I sometimes wonder that myself. Why aren't we all just jumping in? Because I know I was so anxious to get the vaccine, and so were so many of my colleagues. Were so happy once we were able to receive the vaccine. But the reality is that, healthcare workforce is a large workforce, lots of real people from all backgrounds and all sorts of points of view. So there just is in the general population, there are those who either don't have the right information about safety or just being extra cautious and waiting to see what happens. And maybe I think the minority of the healthcare workers who are saying they're reluctant are probably getting a little bit of misinformation perhaps. But I think, I think that's going to come around. This is my own opinion. I think as people see their neighbors and their doctors and their grocery store workers and everyone getting the vaccine and, we're all fine. I think it's going to come around. That's my own opinion. I think there's going to be a big demand for these vaccines, and that's a good thing. So I think the skepticism in our society, we see vaccine hesitancy, but we also keep in mind, at least in pediatrics, the vaccine hesitant families, it's a minority. Okay, they're important to address, and it's sometimes very vocal, but it's not the majority. I think most people are going to get this vaccine.
So what about the new strains and mutations? And there was the UK one, and then it's been over here. And how does this vaccine, is this a one size fits all mutations, or how does it work, Dr. Swamy?
Well, I can start it and then I'll defer to Paul if he wants to add anything else. I think so. It's I guess ultimately we know is it's inevitable. We know that all viruses mutate, so it's not necessarily unexpected. What we hope though is when those things happen is that they don't dramatically impact the infectious risk or the how severe the disease might be. What we know so far, at least what we understand is from the new strains, is they appear to be maybe more contagious, more infectious from that standpoint. But right now, the folks from Pfizer actually just put out some preliminary data looking at what they did was they took samples from that were left over from participants in the trials, and they looked at that in the lab against the vaccine to see if the vaccine would work. And at least in 2 of the strains that are out there that we've heard about, the vaccine still worked in the lab. And that's reassuring, because if it didn't work in the lab, we'd be very concerned it wasn't working in humans that were getting it. I think it's an area that has to be continually closely monitored, because there could be a sort of host of mutations that happen together that could render the vaccine to not work. We hope that's not the case, and we hope that won't happen. On the other hand, I will say that
only if our luck changes.
That's right. It's just kind of how things have gone, right, with COVID. The only other thing to say, though, is that by continuing to monitor it very closely, one of the benefits of that mRNA platform is that we can actually pivot relatively quickly. I mean, relative meaning it's still a matter of many months, but relatively quickly to alter what that mRNA codes to the protein to make. It's possible. I'm not saying it's just going to be a fix, but that is actually one of the benefits from that platform that we have out there.
So, Dr. Spearman, we've got these two vaccines now, and then looking back in the pipeline, the cavalry is marching our way. Tell us how, what's on its way, and how those vaccines are different in how they attack the virus, and maybe in how easy they are to produce. Just give us a little sense of what's coming.
Sure. So we have the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines that are authorized under the FDA's EUA. And then within Operation Warp Speed, there have been other trials that have been moving forward. The AstraZeneca trial is just wrapping up here in the United States. This is the vaccine that originated from Oxford University using a chimpanzee adenovirus that is replication defective. And what that means is it can't really grow in human cells at all. It lacks some essential factors. And what is done is just basically the same sort of insert that is in the mRNA is placed in the context of these adenoviruses, and that produces the spike protein in a different way after a vaccine is given to someone. So that this AstraZeneca product has been evaluated in the United Kingdom and several other parts of the world, and it's already licensed in several countries now around the world. And its efficacy was slightly confusing, I would say, the way they reported it. It was, I think, 62% in one trial and 90% in another, and it averaged out to 70 some. That was a little confusing. And then there was a difference in the dose that was given to those that had a better response. So we're basically in the US waiting to see what the results are from a trial that's very similar to those of the Moderna and Pfizer, done in the US, almost completed. Results should be available, and probably an EUA will be filed, late January, early February, something in that timeline for this, and we'll know more. So that one is almost upon us. Let's see, we have the Janssen vaccine trial, which I believe is also wrapping up. Geeta may know the very latest on that, but that is a single dose vaccine with another adenoviral vector called Ad26. And that one, there's excitement because it's single dose. And if that shows great efficacy, then that makes it so much easier. So that's going to be something to watch for. So we have the RNA vaccines, we have those two adenoviral vector vaccines, and then there are two manufacturers of protein-based vaccines that'll be a little bit later because the Regeneron trial just started, and the Sanofi is going to be delayed for a little while. So those ones are coming down the pike. There actually are, this is a little confusing, but there actually are hundreds of vaccines being developed around the world. There are some that are, none of these are currently in the US, but there are some that are inactivated virus of SARS-CoV-2. And so none of the ones I've talked about are inactivated virus. So there are lots of other ideas out there, but those are the ones that were really kind of most on us here.
So y'all are going to hate this question, and I'm certainly not asking for a date or even a month, but just if we talked kind of in quarters or seasons, give us just a kind of the roughest outline of, okay, phase one, we should have the vast majority of those people vaccinated, all things being equal. So let's just say not every vaccine comes through trials like we want, but we also don't whiff on all of them. What should we expect, and when can folks, I think a little hope is helpful. So when would you expect for some sort of normalcy to start to return? Is that this time next year? Is it 18 months? And so two-part question, the kind of 65 and older group, when do you see most of them being vaccinated? And then when do you see this thing at least under some sort of control?
Skip, can I clarify something first in that question? I don't want there to be confusion between the phases of vaccine development.
Yeah, thank you for clearing that up.
Of the rollout of the vaccines, because we talk about phase 3 trials. The vaccines that have been authorized, those have been the phase 3 trials, which are the efficacy trials to know that the vaccine really works. The rollout is phased in a different way, but it might sound similar. So I think you're referring to the rollout phases.
Yes, I am.
And I'll give that hard question to Dr. Swamy.
Okay. Well, I mean, I just wrote someone this in an email and I said, so there's what I think is I'm going to give you what is probably our best guesstimates, right? So
That's
right
fine.
now, I think most of our states are in kind of that 1B phase, right? So we sort of did healthcare workers with high risk of exposure due to caring for COVID positive individuals and long-term care facilities. So we haven't finished it, right? We're still in it, but we've moved on to the next groups within phase 1B, and that's the 75 and older. And I think because right now we do not have a nationally organized distribution process. We have a distribution of doses to the states, but then it's up to the states to decide on how they're going through those phases. So I know there are some states, I believe, that are vaccinating at 65 and up right now. At least in North Carolina, we're at 75 and up. And our health department, our state, Department of Health is very, very closely monitoring that with the distribution process. So I think we're going to roll through the rest of the phase 1, I think through probably the early spring. So I think when we start to look at groups 3 and 4 phases, sorry, it's very confusing, but phase 3 and 4, where we get to the sort of students, K through 12, and then kind of all the other healthy younger people out there. We're probably looking at the summer, sometime in the summer for that. I keep telling my kids I'm hopeful that we'll be at a good place, that they'll be back in school in person by September. I mean, I think that could be a good launch, but that won't mean that we won't still be practicing social distancing or distancing in some way, masking, that sort of thing, because, I think it's every individual person's right to decide if they want to get the vaccine and then therefore to know if they got the vaccine or not. So I don't think we can go around asking people to say, did you get it or not? You can't come in if you haven't gotten it or not. I'm not saying never, but I don't see that happening anytime in the future. So we're going to have to practice a lot of those still precautionary measures in ways until we really see a dramatic impact on the disease incidence across the country. Those are my best guesstimates, but I don't know if you think differently, Paul.
I agree with that. I think it sounds, we're certainly hopeful some things will be back to normal in the summertime. That's what I'm hoping for.
We're nearing the end of our time. We got a few more minutes. There's some folks with some ethical concerns. I'm seeing some questions about people's DNA being changed and about certain types of tissue being used in vaccines. Is there any truth to that, or is that just kind of the typical myths you see in this kind of situation?
I'm happy to take that one if that's so. Well, as a scientist, I can give you lots of science, related answers to that. But will that be totally convincing? I think, there's from a scientific standpoint, the RNA vaccines can't go into your DNA. In fact, they don't even get into the nucleus, the place where our chromosomes live. They basically are in the cytoplasm of cells when they're taken in, and then they're not there very long. The RNA makes protein and then it gets degraded. In fact, one of the reasons that these mRNA vaccines have to be basically encapsulated in a lipid carrier is because mRNA can break down. It just is not a very, very stable or long-lived molecule. So I feel like this is a very safe approach. In fact, if you think of it, the other things that we use, like when we use a live vector, now they're safe also, the attenuated live vectors, but they have DNA, they make RNA, they sometimes can get to the nucleus. So there's maybe the mRNA vaccines would be even safer. But the real bottom line is long-term follow-up, I think, will be even more convincing to everyone. As a scientist, I think they're going to be very, very safe. And what we've seen so far bears that out. But the long-term follow-up will be great.
Yeah, I think another thing to note, and Paul, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, is that even though this concept of mRNA vaccines or mRNA for use to prevent an infection, right, in this way, is very new to the general public. This is a technology that's actually been under research for 10 plus years, if not longer. It isn't that somebody came up with it, 18 months ago and we just started testing it. So the folks who have been working on this have been working over a long time. I think what changed pretty rapidly over the last, say, maybe 3 to 5 years is to figure out how to get that mRNA into the body and have enough time for it to actually work without the body sort of degrading it or it being digested away. And the why I bring that up is that there have been some trials, particularly by Moderna, looking at mRNA vaccines for other infectious diseases, not large scale like the phase 3s, but that has been tested in other people. And mRNA technology has been something that people have been looking at for a long time, actually to treat cancers and to treat other conditions. So it's just that that this is going to be this is the first sort of large scale platform use of an mRNA technology.
I'm scrolling through a couple viewer questions, and one of them is someone asking about donating blood. They have a rare blood type, so their blood is in high demand. They've had a positive test, and so this is blood that would go to, anyway, is there anything about having the disease or getting the vaccine that affects one's ability to donate blood?
Shouldn't be.
Not after you're out of the infectious period. And, some blood banks will have different standards for how long, but usually it's a couple months after an acute infection.
That's right.
Here's another one, and we'll kind of rapid fire these. Are there any other proven vaccines that use the same process, mRNA, being used in the COVID vaccine?
Not approved for use. There are some in other trials.
Okay, that's good. Oh, that one's too long to ask. Let's see. We've talked about getting the vaccine if you've already had antibodies. There was, why, viewer question that I'm going to ask in the first person, why can't I choose my brand? If I like Heinz better than Hunt's ketchup, why can't I like Pfizer better than Moderna's vaccine?
I think someday you might be able to, but right now with the limited supply and the, distribution and the fact that these two look very, very equivalent, that I think you should get what's offered either at your workplace or by your public health agencies in your location and not worry about it. But, there will be a time where there will be multiple choices and we can all make that.
Great. Dr. Geeta Swamy, Dr. Paul Spearman, y'all have been terrific. And we had a big old audience and the questions poured in. Folks were very engaged and I know very appreciative of you giving this time. There's, people are anxious out there, and to be reassured with good hard information from big time experts, it means a lot. And so thank you for volunteering this time. We appreciate it very much. We hope y'all stay safe and warm. It's like 40 degrees in Tallahassee today. So we're all, I'm sure it never gets that cold in Cincinnati,
no, never.
Dr. Spearman. So we're all bundled up. But thank you very much for your time, and maybe we can do this again someday. Thanks again to Tallahassee Memorial Healthcare, the Village Square, and the USA Today Florida Network for simulcasting this and providing the questions and the infrastructure and the marketing for us to reach as many people as we could. And if you have any more questions that come in, we'll see if we can find a way to get them answered for you. And that's all we have. Thank you.